Welcome to A Pint With Seaniebee, 147. 147. It's a horrible, wintry, snowy day in Dublin. We are in the midst of our top 20 countdown as chosen by the Don, who's here with me. Hello, the Don.
Morning, Captain.
How are you?
I'm alright. You know you're old, by the way, when you call a snowy day a horrible day.
Well, it is. No, there's nice snowy days and horrible snowy days.
I still call it horrible. See, like
it's like the days when it's like it's not sticking, you can't make snowmen, it's slushy, your feet get wet and cold, it doesn't stick, it's just shit. And actually, we have a yellow snow warning in Ireland today, which is quite funny. The RT weather forecasters were all going, well, we have a yellow snow warning in effect for most of Ireland, and surely the warning is just don't eat it.
Yeah, but I don't like snow because it affects my life. It doesn't affect you. You're not stuck anywhere. I get stranded if it's snowing. I can't drive over here, and snow is heavier where I live. But when I got up this morning and the kids were looking out my daughter's window, like, snow. I was like, fuck. So I'm old.
It's one of the greatest things about being a child when you're older was that day when you wake up and you haven't pulled your curtains in your bedroom and you can feel
it's really bright.
It's so quiet. And
it's the brightness. It's so bright.
And you go, fuck.
Is
no school today. So, those of you who were listening to the last show, we had an election in Ireland. Those of you who don't want to hear us warbling on can scroll forward 15 minutes, which is where the meat of this podcast will start when the Don reveals who episode 18 is. But we had an election in Ireland.
We did. We had a general election.
And it was a seismic earthquake, a tsunami wave, a revolution.
All right, Irish Times. So usually we have two main parties, our civil war parties.
Centre-right.
Yeah. So they've been back and forth passing the baton for 100 years, basically. And for the first time, we have three parties that are fairly neck and neck. I think.
So what happened was that Sinn Féin, which is the former political wing of the IRA, and very divisive kind of party, absolutely came out of the traps like a storm and took a third of the vote and a third of the seats of the major parties under the stewardship of a feisty woman called Mary Lou MacDonald.
Let's phrase that a second way. What happened is Sinn Féin, which is a left-wing party, came out of the traps and continue on. And I'm not denying that it's not me saying, oh, stop the IRA thing. But realistically, the reason people are getting their knickers in a twist is because it's a left-wing party. That's the terror. That is why the stocks started dropping within a minute. You know, it's a...
Well, you can't keep saying... Like, one of their elected senior members of Sinn Féin, that guy from Waterford or Tipperary, he was in a pub, and he's a very senior member. He's not some goofball they pulled in off the streets because they think they might be have a chance of getting more TDs. And he was called in the pub, singing IRA songs, talking about Chucky Garlaw, which is the famous rant about our day will come and we'll eventually get Northern Ireland back, talking about the hunger strikers and we'll never forget them. That is a problem.
Yeah, I think that's stupid. But I would also point out that there are members of the other two main parties that are frequently known to sing a rousing rendition of Come Out You Black and Tans on a night out. Yeah. This fucking Egypt hadn't the intelligence to know that every rag in the country is on the lookout for some TD.
Well, every voter is.
No, literally, as this election unfolded, every Sinn Féin TD and every member of Sinn Féin should have been warned, listen, there are journalists from every fucking paper that are willing to pay any money to get a video of you singing in the pub and of you saying something like, don't do it.
Yeah, but even that is wrong. Because they shouldn't have to say that, because that means they actually do want to. And
actually, I would disagree. I would think that it's quite common. It's quite common in all walks of life in Ireland that after a few drinks, there are songs that come out. They should have had more on than to be walked into that situation. Even if it's stupid, but I mean, we've all sung them.
So for our overseas listeners, the Sinn Féin is probably known by people like Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. They were the political wing of a terrorist organisation.
I was never the IRA.
Which set up, which is part of the power sharing in Northern Ireland at the moment, and has never really had any traction down south. But suddenly it has arrived on the scene with a bang. You know, as they say, it has changed the face of Irish politics utterly. We're now in a situation where we're not sure who's going to go into government. The traditional parties say they don't want to work with Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin have got a mandate from the people. So it's all very exciting.
It's all very exciting.
What do you think is going to happen?
Now, I would never ask you to disclose your private ballot, Sean.
Yeah.
But I'll share mine. I voted for Social Democrats. Who did you vote for?
I voted for Sinn Féin. But I mean, I said I never thought I'd see the day where I would vote for them. They do have blood on their hands, whether we like it or not.
Oh, all the parties do.
We have, well, yes, I know. It's not. It's like saying, oh, well, all the parties do. Yeah, this one particularly does. And I voted for them because they were the only party that clearly was treating the homeless situation that we have in Ireland as an emergency, and the health and the housing crisis. The other ones came at us with more of the same. Sorry, slowly, catchy. Yeah, we know it's a problem, but we can't.
Well, look, most of the country,
we have an emergency.
Most of the country voted for them, not because they're voting for Sinn Féin. They voted for the only left-wing alternative.
Yes. And we've been
hammered, and particularly my generation, the locked-out generation. You never had a hope in hell of buying property. So, like when I'm 30, my generation, if you went to college and just as you're finishing your degree, we've been promised absolutely everything. We've been brought up in the Celtic Tiger. You work hard, you get your points, you do this, civil service, you do that, but there's a clear path laid out for you. And then suddenly, just as everyone my age was getting their degree, sorry, it's all gone to shit. There's no jobs for a lot of people that worked really hard. They had to emigrate. Those who did have jobs, even for stuff like teaching, by the way, it's no longer permanent and pensionable. It's going to be shitty pay. You're not going to be on the ladder in a couple of years. And on top of that, within 5 years of my generation graduating, when they get to the age when they want to start saving for a house, oh yeah, that's not going to happen. A single person now earning 70 grand is not going to get a mortgage. So that's a problem. So if you're of my generation, tough tits, you got locked out. And we've been told time and time again, we get this back and forth from the establishment, which are the centre-right parties. On the one hand, we get this constant narrative that we're the Peter Pan generation, we won't grow up, we want things handed to us, that we're immature, that we don't remember what happened, that we're idiots, that we're petty and childish, but we're actually the generation that haven't been allowed to grow up. Lots of us had to leave. Lots of people haven't had children because they're not in a position to, and the ones that have are rearing them in their mom's house. People are sitting, living in their mother's box bedroom, working harder than any other generation alive at the moment has had to. I mean, we can say, well, 100 years ago there was this. Actually, they've had to work a lot harder. And listening to people in their 60s who were part of the generation that fucked us over.
Why do you say they've had to work harder?
Because we have 0 hours contracts. We don't have, you don't walk into a solid, years ago there were working class jobs. If you were a bus driver, if you were whatever, it might not be fantastic pay. You might have to work 6 days of work instead of 5 days a week, but you go and you do your job and you come home and you have a home and you can keep a family. That's not an option anymore. We're not getting the solid permanent pensionable jobs with all the benefits. We're having to work long hours. And you don't get a house, and then if you're in a position if you're doing well enough that you can afford to pay rent, grand, but rent is ridiculous. You don't have a lifestyle, not at all. Rent is just massive. Rent is 3 times what you would be paying on a mortgage for that property, and there's not enough property to rent. They're only the people who are lucky enough to be able to afford to rent. There's no money left over, and if anything goes wrong, do not ring your fucking landlord, or he'll have his nephew moving in next week, which just means he's putting it on the market again, bumping it up for somebody else. I mean, it's no surprise why our generation said, and the other thing, when we're not being told we're the Peter Pan generation and it's being blamed on us, we're being told, yeah, we are going to sort it out, just hang on a little longer. We're in our 30s now, how much longer are we going to hang on?
Well, that's why I jettisoned them, because there was no action. It was like, we're going to build 100,000 houses, we've built 13 so far this year, just calm down, we're getting to it. And I didn't have either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael on my ballot. And this is interesting for people listening from around the world, we have a rise in populism going on in America, Britain, Brazil, Philippines. We have despotic leaders raising their heads again in previously safeish democracies. We have a situation in Ireland which would be an interesting microcosm, where literally the people have gone, we want a society that's not about neoliberal greed and profits and banks, and we want a society that starts to look after its most vulnerable and starts to look after its people. And I don't believe that's populism.
We want to live in a society, not an economy. That is the line that my generation have handed out. And actually, interesting, we do have some of those far-right populists, and every last one of them did not get a seat. Yeah. In fact, they got 100 votes in their constituencies. So overwhelmingly, the country, to the racist, populist, far-right, anti-immigrant, hate mongers, the entire country went, piss off.
But it's interesting to see Peter Casey, who was a former guest on the show, who would be one of these far-right populist, Trump-like characters, divisive, racist. A guy I know, but I'm astonished, really, at what was under the surface of his politics. But I mean, he was wearing a flat cap and holding up his suits with bailing twine in Donegal trying to get elected, and they just sort of ran him out of town.
Yeah, even Donegal said, piss off. Yeah.
So it's not a populist rising, I don't think, and I think because a party came into power, and literally there were people who were getting 200 votes in the previous election last year, suddenly getting to 10,000 votes. So a party and a brand came into power, and I think a lot of the people who are in on their coat are slightly thick. I don't believe we have a strength and depth within Sinn Féin to handle what needs to be handled. However, there are a few people at the top. Owen O'Brien, I think, would make a great housing minister, and Mary, I think,
she's fantastic,
has to be a candidate for our first female prime minister. So
the thing is, I mean, that's the face of Sinn Féin at the moment, and they've done a great job, and there's some really bright people in Sinn Féin, but there are also a load of thick fucking idiots in Sinn Féin, and I was hanging around them 15 years ago, so I know, that fucking idiot. It's not even the fact that he sang a rap song, which we all do, it's the fact that he was stupid enough to do it, and knowing this is exactly the narrative that the Rav's going to want to push out. If you're that fucking stupid that you weren't savvy enough not to send out that image, how are you going to get on in the government? But I think Fine Gael are the only party that are intelligent enough to run the country well in terms of the economy, but they don't give a shit about poor people. A certain generation, and particularly people who are doing well, kind of are in amazement saying, look, we know Fine Gael haven't done right by you, we know that, but you're going to crash the economy, you can't let Sinn Féin in. And the part that I think some people aren't getting is, we're better off if the economy crashes. That'll be great for us. My generation, great, because the only thing that's changed between now and the height of austerity, we're not really any better off. We're still taxed up the wazoo.
You weren't taking along.
They've thrown back a few, maybe a fiver on the
house prices will collapse.
Yeah, their house prices are massive. And so, we'd be fucking grand.
We're fixated with the idea that, oh my God, house prices are collapsing, that's a disaster. And we need our house prices to collapse.
But the number one thing that's hurting people financially is the housing crisis. Yeah. So basically, we can continue on as shitty as we are now, except we might be able to afford housing. And even if you're doing well at my generation, you're going to be paying at least 2/3 of your income on rent. Oh no, you've taken away my biggest cost. Yeah. Okay. So fucking suits us down to the ground. It may not suit people above a certain wealth threshold and above a certain age for the economy to crash. But the part they're not getting is they didn't look after our generation. They pushed us so far that we're like, okay, bring it on. Crash the economy. At least we'll buy a house.
Our government have been basically paranoid about looking after the wealthy and the rich companies and the banks, and they don't pay any tax, and the poorer people in society, middle class, the working class, are left with the burden as per austerity days. So anyway, a brave new dawn, and we will see what sort of a fist they make of it. And sure, the worst case scenario is they fail, and sure, the other guys are great at failing as well, so at least we give someone else a try at it. Anyway, what else has been happening? We had the Oscars.
We did.
Parasite won, which was great.
Didn't see the Oscars, didn't see the film.
Well worth a look. I watched it about 6 months ago and I was going, that's fucking brilliant. And it's the first ever foreign language movie to win an Oscar. What else is happening? The other big news, of course, is that we don't actually have a bottle to celebrate. Normally the Dawn brings a bottle, but she's drinking a Kong, which is
it's called Kong Strong.
Kong Strong is a little rip-off of Red Bull that costs a quarter of the price. Today is our 3rd anniversary together, which is it's a long time for you to be going out with a complete Aegis.
I have form.
Yeah, so the only reason Shawnee B is stuck in Dublin for the last 3 years and for the foreseeable is because of you one across from me here. It's been a good 3 years. It's been, on the one hand, it's gone very quickly. On the other hand, we've got a lot in. Yeah,
it's weird. It has gone quickly, but when you look through it, you're going to go, that's weird. It's only 3 years.
So happy anniversary, love.
Happy anniversary. Thanks, hon.
And we're in the middle of writing our first movie together as well, so keep an eye out for that. Don't hold your breath, though. Anyway, now we're on to the day's proceedings. We have a top 20 countdown. The Dawn has gone through all the episodes of A Pint With Seaniebee, which was something that she said she was going to do without probably thinking, without properly, but she's done it, and she's got her own top 20. They're in no particular order, but they're a good place to start listening to the podcast if you have been meaning to or haven't quite caught up with it, or was someone who didn't know what podcasts were, and now the podcasts are everywhere. You're on the case. So we have a little game that we play where the Don asks me 3 questions about the guests she's picked this week and see if I remember them.
Okay, question number 1, and this is a quote. There was a world to see and I wanted to see it.
I'd say a lot of people said that, actually. Or words to that effect. Who actually said it? No.
Okay, the next one is in response to your what would you say to your younger self question, which you always ask, which is, this person's response was, I don't know except have faith in the cycle of life and just relax and trust. That goes for everything from finding the job, the partner, the road that's right for you.
Woman?
You don't get to play the yes or no game show. That's after. If you don't get it, there are tougher questions. I'll give you your 3 yes or no.
Okay, no.
Okay, and the third hint is, ideas are like entities floating around, and if you're willing to accept them, you can go on amazing journeys.
Mother Sophia?
No.
Okay, I don't know.
Okay, now you can play your yes or no game show.
It's a woman though, right? Those quotes.
That's a yes. Okay, you're on to 2.
No, tell me.
Okay, fine. Jean Curran.
Jean Curran. Yes, Jean Curran is mad. She's fearless. She went in her 20s, I think. She went to Africa. So Jean's a photographic artist, and she's done some really crazy stuff. Like she went to, I think, Kenya and Ghana, embedding herself into societies, taking pictures, living in mud huts. 6 or 7 years ago, she went to Afghanistan to find some old man who is the last remaining guy who paints sepia onto paintings, and she photographed American soldiers there and got this treatment done and had to go to Dubai. Like she just goes for it.
Jean is everything I'm not.
Yes.
She is. Oh, like she's demented. I mean, fair play to her. Wouldn't be me. Would not be me. Travelling around the world. I mean, like
on her own.
I know. The on your own part would be great because I mean. No, that part is like that's.
I could see you under the wheel of a tank, cowering like a little kitten, crying.
No, you see, that's unfair because
the Don, yeah, but
if I'm actually in danger, I tend to be fine about it.
Yeah.
If there's a reason to panic, I'm absolutely fine. I'm really cool and collected. I'll manage things. In fact, it gets a bit worse, the level of my bravery when I'm in actual danger. However, traveling around the world, getting icky and dirty, having to meet people all the time. Like, I mean, yeah, you're on your own, but that means you have to socialise constantly because you're going to have to do it in a different... Jesus, I'd be fucking worn out. And some of these things that she did were really cool, but I noticed the fine print. Like, when you to get to these gold mines, did it involve hiking up half a fucking mountain on the way?
Oh, yeah.
No thanks. There's no amount of setting spray. My make could be melted.
She probably ate beetles.
Jesus, I wouldn't be into it. So anyway, no, but joking aside, there's a massive bravery there. It's a great lesson for anybody in bravery and in not letting fear hold you back.
Yes, when I have the sort of log line of people who've led brave, creative, interesting lives,
I think out of the whole podcast, she wins.
This one fits the bill. Without further ado, we give you number 18 on the Don's Top 20 Countdown. This is the lovely Jean Curran. Folks, we're in one of the newest art galleries in Dublin. It is called Station House Art Gallery. It's located in Dalkey, one of the nicest villages in County Dublin. You know, those of you who listen regularly to my show, that it is about people who have led brave and creative and interesting lives. If there was somebody who met that criteria full on, it would be my guest today. She is one of Ireland's foremost contemporary photo-based artists. She's also has been a photojournalist. She doesn't take no for an answer and is extremely driven when it comes to executing and delivering on her vision. And I think that's the reason she's here today. She's also a great friend of mine. Her name is Jean Curran. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Is this your first podcast?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm delighted to be popping my cherry with you.
She's popping her cherry in the
cherry.
gallery, which is, I think this gallery is showing your work for the next 2 weeks or so.
Yeah.
The gallery is surrounded by beautiful, almost Rothko-esque prints that have been done in the photo lab. So they look like art, but they're actually photographs.
Correct.
And it's really hard to explain what you do, but it's a dye transfer method, which is one of the oldest ways of developing photography. But why don't you tell me what this gallery is showing up and what we're seeing around us?
What we're looking at is 15 prints, which I have made using the dye transfer method. Dye transfer was one of the first methods of making a full colour photographic print, and it's the same process by which Technicolor made their inglorious Technicolor movies.
It's fair to say it's a dying art, right?
Oh, it's pretty much dead.
Pretty much dead. So Jean's trying to resuscitate it in a studio in London.
Yes, correct.
What you seem to do is you every 2 years you come out with something very different. You're not an artist that sits on her laurels and continues to churn out the same stuff. Why is that?
I think it's been a journey
Right.
to get to where I am now. I started off as a photojournalist. I was really interested in photojournalism. I used to open magazines and newspapers and I couldn't, I got really excited about the imagery. I used to look at the New York Times every day to see what their leading photo was, and I used to follow the photographers.
Did you know James Knockedaway?
Oh yeah.
We were trying to use him in the Gillette ad.
Were we? Yeah, I don't think he would.
Well, we probably wouldn't. I like the way he used to wear a white shirt. This is what intrigued us. We were thinking that he would get ready to go out. James Knockedaway is possibly one of the most famous.
He's the greatest war photographer that ever lived.
War photographer, but he used to wear this pristine white shirt so that all the soldiers who were fighting each other, as he would walk down the street, that's the photographer guy, and he would get these amazing shots. You did some amazing shots over in, was it Kenya?
Yeah.
Would that have been your breakout album?
Well, yeah. Well, my first, I suppose, breakout was when I went to Ghana and I did a project on the illegal gold mining sector, and that was really a project that I planned myself. I got a grant for. I brought a journalist with me. I wanted to go out and do this, and I knew that it was something that hadn't really been covered before.
Now, to those listening, you were what age when you did this? Early 20s?
Yeah, like maybe 24.
What makes you go, you know what I'm going to do? Now, bear with me. I'm going to go and an Irish girl. I'm going to go over to Ghana and photograph the mining industry over there. What made you pick that?
I had that idea for ages.
Where does it come from?
Well, now we're going on to a completely different topic,
right.
Because what we're really talking about is the power of an idea and knowing when you have an idea and actually being gifted ideas. Ideas are literally like entities that float around the place, and if you're lucky enough if you're willing to accept them,
I agree with that.
Then you can go on amazing journeys.
But did one night you were just lying there, gold mining in Canada. Where do you think the idea germinates in you?
I remember asking myself, where did gold come from? And then doing a little bit of research into it, and then kind of looking at other photographic bodies of work, and went off and did it. And I was also started looking at the stock markets, and I remember at the time some countries all of a sudden were buying like huge amounts of gold. And I was like, there's something in this. Let's go.
I read somewhere that there's the amount of gold ever mined out of the earth would fit under the Eiffel Tower.
It's a lot less than diamonds.
Yeah. Mad. So you go to Accra, do you? Is that where you went?
Yeah, well, we went to Accra, and then there's like a gold belt, basically.
Right.
So I went to about 5 or 6 different towns. But I mean, if you roll into these towns and you go look for somebody that might be able to help you with a contact in a mine, but all they do is like kind of go, follow me, and then you trek for 2.5 hours up the side of a mountain, and all of a sudden you come out of a clearing where there's just like men scattered all over it with no shirts on and just like working in the scorching heat with pickaxes and carrying canvas bags of rock down mountains on their heads. Like everything is very, primitive and artisanal, and they go, come on, we'll take you down the tunnel, and you get into a tunnel that's been made.
Are you scared at this stage?
Well, I'll tell you now what happened. We got into, they were like, let's go into the tunnel. And the tunnel is really, it's a tunnel that's been created by men with pickaxes and chipping away at it for years. So we crawled along, and you go down little bits, and you go around corners, and you're crawling along, and I don't know how many.
You've got camera equipment.
Yeah, I've got a camera.
Right,
yeah, and they've got torches, like really primitively, with elastic bands and bits of string tied around their heads. And
but surely, at some point, when you're down in that thing, you're going, "Oh, gee, this was a bad idea."
I'll tell you when that moment happened. The journalist was with me, and we came to a point, and we had been in the tunnel now, crawling along for maybe half an hour. Okay. And at the end of it, due to get down into what was like a little bunny hole and crawl along, I looked at it and I went, if I get down there, I'm not going to be able to get back up. I'm not going to be able to pull myself up. It was such a narrow little shaft. Yeah. Now, these men are up and down there every day. They've no hassle. I was with these two guys. The journalist went ahead with the other two guys. And I was with these two guys and they were like, we wait here. And I was like, no, we'll just go back. And they were like, no, we'll wait here. So next thing, one of them takes out a bit of newspaper, as they do, and he starts rolling a joint in the tunnel. Right. Okay, so I'm sitting in the tunnel. These two guys, it's pitch dark. Yeah. Okay, next thing we can hear somebody coming along singing, and a man comes out of nowhere carrying 2 sticks of dynamite. He doesn't have a torch. He talks to the other two guys. They're laughing about the fact that I'm in the tunnel, and he has a little smoke off the joint, and he goes on, and I'm like, joint, tunnel, dynamite. This is not where I want to be. This is just a recipe for disaster, and I don't want to be the one that's freaking out here, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable. I just want to go. And they were just like, what's the big deal?
Some of those photographs you captured there are just beautiful portraits of people, and just the sort of strength of them and the resilience of them. And you'd think that they would have been posed and that you would have taken hundreds or whatever. I suppose you did, but they're magnificent.
Thank you.
And so there'll be a link to that in the blurb on the website. So, most people who would do something like that would say, well, that's got that out of my system, and get back to Waterford, where she's from. You're from a little village outside Waterford, which is in the south east of Ireland. Tell me a little bit what it was like growing up down there.
I grew up on a farm. I'm the third daughter out of four. Four was born in 4.5 years.
It's called Irish quads, probably.
Yeah, probably. It was very isolated, actually. No one ever called in for me to come out and hang out in my life. But I loved living in the countryside up until a point. Yeah. And then there was definitely a bit of wildness in me. And if I got out of the house and got into Waterford City to stay with my friends, getting me home was a different story altogether. Right. But I'm very, very grateful for, there's a great amount of mischievousness. Thank you. And but also innocence that goes with growing up in the heart of the country. And my dad made us all work on the farm at different points, and I really appreciate that work ethic that instilled. But when I was ready to go, I was ready to go. Right. And then I stayed away for quite a while, and now I want nothing more than to be back there, living in amongst the fields. Right. Great.
Do you feel you've got a lot of it out of your system?
I can't.
When you say you want to go back to the field, so first of all, I suppose, why? What were the sort of drivers that said, I've got to get out of here? Was it to see the world?
Oh, big time. Right. I mean, there had to be more going on than where I was living. There was a world to see, and I wanted to see it. Right. I never really felt like I slotted into groups that were going in a particular way. Even when I finished school and my friends were all going off to live in Paris together, or Amsterdam together, I went off and I lived on my own in Canada, and then I lived on my own here, and then I always was interested in kind of just doing my own thing, and I wanted to see the world on my own terms, I suppose, and explore it in my own way, also learn my own lessons and pick myself up after them. And I was always interested in art in school. However, I did a very poor leaving cert, and I never applied it myself in school whatsoever. Look, when I went to the career guidance sister and I asked her about doing photography, she said the points were too high. Here's a form for nursing, and that was it. So it was carve your own path.
It's a recurring theme in these podcasts that nearly everybody has either gone, had really bad advice from parents or from career guidance or from teachers, and anyone who had this spark in them, people try and quench it out and go, go into banking, become a bank teller.
Yeah.
You know, like don't try and do anything outside your station.
If my father told me to go down and join the guards one more time, I was like.
She would have been a vanguard, by the way. That means female guard. That's an Irish term. So you were doing photojournalism. Is the next stop that we want to talk about the Afghanistan thing, or is there anything in between this?
Well, I worked for the Irish press here, and
Right.
then I realised that I was never going to have the front cover of Time magazine if I stayed working for the Irish Star and the Irish Independent.
Did you find that the editors were also very conservative with their sort of photo selection?
All the photographs that appear in most of the Irish papers are pretty much the same. Photographers aren't brands here. And money's not really invested into photographers. Yeah. But it's one of the best educations you can get. Right. If I can't go out to certain areas where someone's been shot in Dublin and go out and cover it and go with a journalist who is approaching people on the street, then I have no business going out to Kenya or Afghanistan or anywhere else.
So you found you were able to see and perceive that this was a good training, but it was still limiting you.
Yeah.
Would that be fair?
Yeah. So that's.
And so what was the next jump?
Moved to Kenya then.
So why did you move to Kenya?
I moved to Kenya because many of the photojournalists that I followed that were working for Time magazine, Newsweek, the New York Times, all were based in Kenya.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
When I'd looked them up, because it's got an international airport.
Nairobi.
It's a UN city. There's lots going on there.
So did you just move there, or did you?
I literally arrived at 11:30 at night with 2 bags. I didn't even have a hotel room.
What did your
booked.
parents say? That you were mad?
Like loads of people said I was mad, but sure, like I wasn't listening to anybody. I was just going.
Yeah.
You know.
And did you know anyone there?
No.
Right. So you just
arrived.
Okay. And so what happened?
I got a taxi downtown and got into a hotel and had a fight with the taxi driver, arguing over like $5 or something. And then I got up the next day and I was like, okay, I live here now. You know, you're going to have to make it work. I can't even remember.
How much money did you have with you?
I didn't have a huge amount of money.
Right, but like
I had a couple of grand.
A couple of grand, okay. You had a hotel room.
Yeah.
And you had your cameras.
Yeah. What I did is I actually ended up ringing Goal. You know, and they said, come in and see us. And I went in to see them and they said, do you know that there's an Irish journalist who's just after arriving out here as well? He's come out to work as the East African correspondent for the Irish Times. Right. And I said, no. So then I met up with him and then we started doing a little bit of work together and that was great. And then being introduced to more journalists and photojournalists through that. And we ended up renting an apartment together. But I was really unhappy in Nairobi. I knew... Because I was surrounded by much bigger photojournalists and I was never going to get the jobs. And not only that, I was looking at their lifestyle and I really started to question whether it was for me.
So it's a hard drinking correspondence club, from what I gather from Asia. I mean, there was always a place where all the journals and photographers all hung out and it was male and it was that the same thing?
A little bits of it.
Yeah.
But more than that, I just felt that I don't want to go and witness all the worst things that are happening in the world on my own and stay in really shit hotels along the way. This idea of these middle-class white people with cameras that cost I don't know how much, going into these areas and actually creating this representation of what it is like to be for somebody else's life.
Yeah.
And that started to make me quite unsettled. I realised that there was a huge kind of hole in the system. I also knew that my ideas were a lot more conceptual. So I moved to the coast where there was no photojournalists, to Mombasa, where all the pirate stories were happening.
Yeah.
Now I was really interested in the pirates.
That's bad pirates. It's not Johnny Depp pirates.
No, really bad pirates actually. And I started going around interviewing people that had been kidnapped by pirates.
But you're also a blonde woman in a Muslim country. Did you burqa up or did you? No. So you're amongst these pretty violent dudes who, you know, are often portrayed, whether it's real or not, as being reasonably
crazy,
especially towards women. I mean, where does this sort of little tremble of fear come into all this? Is this not there?
I have this thing. You need to be aware of what you're doing and you need to be responsible for yourself. Yeah. However, it's too easy to allow fear to control you. It's imaginary. Yeah. You know, so if you're going to imagine things, imagine something creative and imagine something positive out of it. Don't be a fool when you're walking down the street. make sure that, you're protecting yourself.
Yeah.
However, don't allow fear to hold you back, because at the end of the day, before I went to Kenya, everyone was like, oh, and then this thing happened, somebody, and then that. And I just didn't listen to any of it. I decided I was going, and I was going to be okay. I took care of myself when I was there, but I wasn't going to let the possibility of the what ifs stop me. And I went out and nothing happened to me.
But you're also an appreciator of other people's cultures. And at what point did you make the decision not to work with their customary habits, veiling yourself and covering?
When I moved to Mombasa, which is 98% Muslim, there's a lot of African Arabs.
Yeah.
The Africans don't cover their heads.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Too hot.
Yeah, I ended up following and kind of living with a Muslim family for about 6 months, where I followed their 11-year-old daughter around and photographed her.
How did you find them?
I met her one night on the street. She came up and tried to sell me samosas, and I just thought she was just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And she was wearing this kind of raggedy skirt. But I just wanted to know for myself that you're fed all these representations of Africa all the time, and here's this little girl on a busy street going around selling food. What must her life be like? And you're constantly told, oh, the poor Africans. And I just wanted to know for myself. So I asked for the following evening to meet me at the same place, and she never came back. And then I waited that evening. I waited the following evening. I waited the following evening. And then eventually the waitress in the cafe went, okay, we've had enough of this. We're going to go find her. Well, it was one of those occasions where you have one woman with you, and then before you know it, there's 2 other women. And then you go to the night market, you ask in the night market, and then before you know it, 3 women come and follow you from the night market. And before you know it, there's a crowd of you walking down the street looking for this girl who's after giving you a fake name. And you eventually find the house and meet the mother, and then just ended up becoming friends with them.
So tell me, this is in Mombasa, is it in the...
It was in a little town called Mtwapa, 10 kilometres north from Mombasa.
Okay, I'm getting bamboozled.
Sorry.
Right, so you go up to this little girl's door. Now, just put yourself in an tiny Irish village, and some photographer from wherever comes up and goes, hey, I want to photograph your little girl and you and whatever. What did she say, the mother?
They were fine.
And they let you stay with them?
I would come and go from the house all the time. I didn't ever really want to overstay my welcome, so I would stay in a cheap guest house down the road. But I basically came and I celebrated Eid with them. Fatima, the mother, her brother got married, and it was further up the coast. I went with the family, and we all went up to the Muslim wedding, which was the Sharia law in this part of the town. Everyone's there, the men, the women, and all of a sudden you walk into a room and all the men leave. Yeah. And they go celebrate the wedding in another house, and you stay with the women. And
so, what became of this? Did you have were you doing sort of a docu-diary type thing?
I found, and I put together a beautiful body of work. However, when it came to going around and showing it to editors, they would always kind of go, "But what's wrong with her life?"
Yeah, exactly.
And at the time, I didn't know enough about putting kind of conceptual narrative bodies of work together.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that it actually could have made a beautiful book.
Yeah.
I just went around to editors and they were like, but what's wrong with her?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, actually, it's just to pretty much show that although they're not wealthy, their life is very, very rich.
Yeah.
Lots of things have been decided for her already in life, and they were like, okay, well, maybe something will happen, and if something happens,
It's extraordinarily short-sighted, because the most popular shows and with the longest longevity have been soap operas, which are something's wrong with everyone's life, but it's kind of day to day, eye on what we all live,
Yeah.
It's almost like a documentary. And here we have something that's completely outside the pale, literally. And, also for things like the way we're in a situation right now with Islam, and it's all covered by, everyone has a sort of the same kind of pigeonhole that they put Muslims into, and there's kind of lots of different types of Muslims out there. And is there any hope for resurrecting that? Or?
Yeah, I would love to. And it's some of the work that I'm most proud of.
Yeah.
But I would love to go back and visit them again.
Do you stay in touch? Where is the girl now? What age is she now?
She is
20 or something?
No, she's 16.
Okay.
Yeah. So I hope she's still in school. I don't know if she's still in school, but I've been friends with her older sister on Facebook and things.
What's your take, just looking at that experience of your life, on the whole Africa? Because you've done Ghana and you've done both sides of the continent. What did you take out of Africa?
I absolutely love Africa. However, it's exhausting when you're there on your own.
Yeah.
Because while the aid culture has done a lot of good, it's also done a lot of bad. So when the minute people see a white person coming, they assume that you've got loads of money, and so there's like the white person price and the African price. People are never really going to learn to help themselves if they're never given the opportunity to help themselves. And there's such a system of corruption, and there's such a system of people coming in then to like help out, although, you know, the government's really corrupt, but there'll always be some aid agency that comes in then and does that. And it's hard. There's an initiative that's lost there. However, you meet young Africans and the new burgeoning kind of middle class of Africans, and my God, the potential in tech, the potential in computer science, just everything, huge amount of initiative and potential. Yeah.
We're sitting on the cusp of a major famine, which the world is of course ignoring. South Sudan, Somalia, even Ethiopia is talking
Yemen.
about going off in Yemen. One of the things I heard, and I've only been to South Africa and Egypt, and I haven't been into the sort of the Great Middle, but that this thing I keep hearing is that we tend to call it Africa, and they hate they hate that because it's like calling Europe, you know, and not appreciating the different countries, different cultures, difference between Dr. Congo and Rwanda and Burundi and Nigeria and Angola.
Yeah.
They're all their own separate thing with their own separate problems. Yeah. But we all think, it's all about famine and malaria and AIDS and blah, blah, blah. That's the way Africa is. And sort of, you know, trying to, one of the things I like about, and maybe we can talk about this, it's a theme in your life, in your work, in my view, that you always try and get to the human actuality of on the ground rather than the generality of what people say about a place. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'm very little interest in taking a photograph of somebody and going back and being like, this is what their life looks like.
Look at this poor person here.
I have no interest in that.
So we're going to move on to Afghanistan. So not content with going to dangerous Mombasa, Kenya and Ghana and gangland killings in Ireland. When I met Jean, she had this idea to go to Afghanistan. We're now coming back to collide with this new approach to painting and photography, that there was this old method of colouring paintings, or photographs, when we were only in the black and white era. So there was, you'll see them probably, those old sort of sepia tone with some colour put onto them. Yeah. What's it called?
They're just hand tinted.
Hand tinted. So anyway, I met you. I want to go over to Afghanistan right in the middle of the war, and I want to find this guy who was a very famous painter guy that she found out. You tell the story because you tell it better.
When I was in Kenya, people used to say, you got to go to Afghanistan if you want to make it as a photojournalist. That's where you go. Apparently it was great crack. Right. Apparently there was loads of parties, loads of money, loads going on. But I was watching the photographs that were coming out of Afghanistan, and I was like, it's basically just a one-sided war that we got to see. You had the American soldiers and British soldiers.
The coalition of the willing.
Yeah. And then it was like, guys with black beards are bad, you know, that's it. And then women are treated appallingly. And that was kind of it over the course of it. But I did a master's, and while I was doing my master's, I was really looking for an idea. And I had this idea, and I just felt that this idea was perfect for me at the time, but also I thought that there was a lot of strength in the idea. And the idea was to go to Afghanistan, photograph soldiers that were out there, and then get an Afghan to hand paint the images. And when I first brought this to people, everyone was like, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way you're going to Afghanistan. B, how could you do that to those soldiers? Those soldiers have done nothing to you. How could you do that? And I was like, wait a minute. What makes you think that this is going to be a negative? What makes you think that the Afghan person that's going to paint them?
There.
Yeah. Why do you think that?
What was their angle there?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's been however many hundreds of thousands of soldiers in Afghanistan for 13 years. You know,
and the Russians before them.
Yeah. And I don't know. Anyway, they assumed that the outcome was going to be negative. But anyway, it wouldn't leave me go. I knew that that I had this idea, and this idea was not leaving me off the hook. Right. It was almost like it was my duty to do this. Right. And it wasn't until I met my partner Shane Whelan, and I, after a few too many espresso martinis one night in Copenhagen, was like, I have this idea. And he was like, not a chance, sweetheart. And then I was like, and then I stuck with the idea, and I would bring it up. And eventually he was like, well, if it's just put some structure on it, write it down, and we'll see what we can do. But one of the things that I needed is I needed a media organisation to give me a letter to get on in bed, and nobody would give me the letter.
I'm not surprised. I mean, giving you the letter means a certain sense of responsibility for your life.
Yeah, well, the repatriation of my body in the event that something.
That's expensive shit.
Yeah, that is expensive shit. And but yeah, no one would give it to me, but more so, I felt that people wouldn't give it to me because I'm a woman, and you know.
Well, I still think, man or woman, you're walking into a war zone. It probably was a bit.
I think when you're a girl and you come up along these things on your own, and you start to see how people are like, oh, would you ever just go home and just behave yourself kind of attitude. Like, stop being so patronising. This is a really good idea, and there's merit to my idea, but you're not even paying attention to my idea. Yeah. You're just going, how would you just like cop onto yourself, you know?
Notions.
Yeah.
So basically what happened was she went over and got an embed into the US ISAF headquarters.
Yeah, the ISAF headquarters. Yeah.
She photographed a lot of the personnel, not all Americans, some different nationalities, right?
Yeah.
She went then out of Kabul. You have to find a fixer and someone to drive you around. So first of all, when you arrived in Kabul, what was that like?
That was crazy, and it was so exciting. I'll tell you what was really funny. Was that I arrived in Kabul and I was expecting the fixer to meet me at the airport. But
now explain what a fixer is.
A fixer is somebody on the ground that's going to help you get around and help you translate. Yeah. And I expected him to meet me at the airport, and there was nobody there. And there was all of this kind of like group of Afghan men in typical Afghan clothing. They were all kind of standing around, and I was there for ages, and I was like, where is this guy? And of course my mobile phone didn't work there, so I went up to them. I was like, excuse me can I borrow somebody's phone? And they were like looking at me like I had 10 heads, and they were like, what? And I was like, can I call on your phone this number? Call it. And I called him, and he was like, oh, you're not allowed to come into the airport, you have to come out to a gate, and I'm out at this gate. So I went down and met him, and we had a bit of time before I was going on in bed. No, but when you walk over, like, you know, there's guys with Kalashnikovs. So
these guys would be the Taliban is controlling, kind of. No, or I mean, under the
you don't know who's who.
Right.
That's what they say. You don't know who's looking out, who is. I mean, it's not like.
So what is it? A beepy, dusty, noisy. Donkeys, old taxis.
All taxis, like not so much the donkeys and camels. It's a big, busy, dusty city where there has been new development and signs of really old war.
Right, lots of ruins and bombed out.
Ruins, and then what you soon start to notice is that the air quality is so bad, is so poor. But you also start to notice glimmers of. I remember seeing this young girl who was like, you know, pushing the boundaries as much as she could, and like wearing her scarf barely on the back of her head, full face of makeup, you know, and like walking down the street. And the fixer was saying, we're passing by a stadium, and went in this stadium now, this very famous women's boxing club, and it's also where the Taliban used to bring people and execute them in front of crowds, and that was not so long ago.
So the project itself was a two-stage process. So she flies into Kabul, she gets into the headquarters, she photographs male and female military.
Yeah.
She then has to fly out to Dubai. Why?
To process the film, to develop the film, and to make the prints.
Right. So there's not exactly state-of-the-art photo development studios in Kabul. So she's got to fly out to Dubai, then you've got to get the prints, and then you've got to do what?
Go back to...
And this was even more tricky, I guess, because you didn't have the comfort of staying in the army headquarters, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about the return.
Well, when I returned, I was meant to go to Herat in the west to meet some painters that were going to paint the photographs. However, I knew in my heart of hearts that it was not the right thing to do. So when I arrived back, because I had seen this photo that had been hand painted, and I knew that it would have been hand painted by somebody in the town of Mazar-i-Sharif, and that the name of the studio was Tegan Studios. And I had carried this photo with me for years. I had saved it on my phone. And when I arrived back into Kabul and I met the fixer...
Same guy?
Yeah.
Right.
He said to me, our flight is like in 2 hours or whatever. I said, what I need you to do is I need you to get on the phone, ring everybody you know in Mazar-i-Sharif and find out if you can find this place, Tegan Studios. And he was like, I think we need to ring Shane, your partner. And I was like, no, there's no ringing Shane. I'm on the ground. This is what we're doing. So he got on the phone, he rang around, and somebody said to him, yes, I know somebody that's a master at this. I said, great, that's all we need. Let's change the flight. We're going to Mazar-i-Sharif. So then we needed to organise a drive.
Tell me what Mazar-i-Sharif is.
Mazar-i-Sharif is a town in northern Afghanistan, very much a Taliban stronghold. The Hazari people, a tribal people that are from that region, were really persecuted now by the Taliban. And when I got up there, I heard some really tragic, terrible stories. There would be very little money put into the place, and it's northern, and when you get into the airport, you're not allowed, cars are not allowed to come in, people are not allowed to go into the airport for security purposes. So you walk out and you're just on a dirt track, and there's men there in the middle, it's dark, and a car comes towards you, and you can see by the car lights that there's men there with RPGs strapped to their backs, and there's just
RPG being
rocket propelled grenades.
Of course, sorry. How silly of me for not knowing that.
And we met the driver Rahullah, and he brought us to a hotel where there was more security with RPGs and big gates, but I felt like I was in the right place.
Right. So remember, folks, she's on her own here. She's reliant and trusting this one guy that they found as her fixer. He's gone with you. Is he now saying this is really stupid that you're changing your plan?
No, I think he was excited.
Right.
And I was excited, and we were just going to go for it.
So she basically has one piece of a photograph that she's had on her phone for years, and she's trying to find somebody who knows the artist who painted the photograph or some of him, and she thinks he's here, and then what happens?
Then what happens is that Rahullah, the fixer, and Rahullah, the driver, and I get in the car the next morning, and we go to meet this guy that's apparently the master. We meet him, and he's a young fellow. He would sketch portraits rather than paint in photographs the way that I wanted. And so we realised he wasn't the guy. So he sent us to somebody else. That studio wasn't open, and he wasn't the guy. And so then somebody else sent us to somebody else. So we went to that person. And at one point, I take out my phone, and I'm showing somebody the pictures. And Rahullah, the driver, asked Rahullah, the fixer, were they photographs? And we said yes. And he said, I know somebody, get in the car. So we got in the car and we drove along, and there was a man sitting outside a shop. And the minute I saw him, I knew this is the guy. I just knew.
You felt it.
Yeah.
And he was the guy.
He was the guy.
And tell his story.
His name was Muhammad Kareem, and it turns out he sat into the car, and I said, can you paint these? And he looked at the picture and he went, they're my pictures. And I was like, and he said, I can do it. And straight away wanted to do the deal. And I had no problem doing a deal with him. He went off then. He hadn't painted or used his paints or anything in 30 years. And he went off and he got his paints, and he came back and met us in the hotel where we were staying, and he put all the prints out, and he sat down and he put his paints out and he started painting. And
what did he so someone from Ireland has arrived with a mobile phone and it's his painting?
Well, it actually turned out that it was a picture of his deceased brother that I'd been carrying around, and his brother had been a great photographer and a great painter also, but he had been killed by the Mujahideen in the 80s. And that they had run that studio together, and over the course of 3 days all these stories started coming out. He started off with such excitement and talking about painting and how he used to do things, and the following day brought in lots of his pictures, and then on the third day really started to, I think, kind of become a bit overwhelmed by sadness about all that hasn't happened in life, and about lamenting about the pleasure that he got from painting, and then to realise over the course of a conflict, nobody talks about art. Nobody talks about anything creative or beautiful. All anybody ever talks about is survival and security. And that was it. And he realised, I think, all that has been missing and all that has been lost. But also was saying things like, don't underestimate what you've done here. Yeah. And you've come and you've asked somebody what their input is in Afghan, and there's not too many people who have done that. And his input, what I wanted to know was, well, what have you got to say about the conflict? And he went that nobody ever asked any of the artists. Nobody ever came and asked Afghan musicians to make work about what it's like to live in a country with a conflict that's been raging for so long. Nobody ever asked the sculptors, the painters, anybody.
The end result were these beautiful, I'm trying to give my own view of them, they were like from another era, but they were modern pictures of soldiers that were coloured in a way that made them look very from the late 1800s, early 1900s, and quite jaunting like that you go, what's this about? There's another link on the blurb for this podcast where you can see the actual photographs. How was it leaving him, and the idea, the serendipitous nature of you finding this needle in a haystack must have just told you I'm doing the right thing. That's just bonkers that you met the guy.
Yeah, I knew it, but I also felt like, okay, this idea didn't care about me. This idea needed to be realised. I've realised it now. Okay, I can. And it was just when I came back, I was like, okay, I can get on with other things now. I can get on with the rest of my life.
As if I can start the long list again. But in her own inimitable way, she then has to see. You seem to have to come up with a new thing. In art, there's people who tend to find something and repeat.
Yeah.
Your work tends to zag off in lots of different directions. Is that fair?
Well, yes, but however, it's all been on one journey. And that journey has very much always been around the limitations of photography. Okay. And if I had just been okay with photography when I was in Kenya, then I'd probably be sitting in front of you now as a war-hardened photojournalist.
Yeah.
But I realised that it has more limitations than liberties, and that how things are represented through the medium omit the subjective experience of the sitter. I take a photograph of you, you don't take a photograph of me, so there's an inherent imbalance.
Right.
It's a very different thing to be somebody that's gone in to cover something and other than somebody that lives through it.
Yeah.
Realising that in Kenya and becoming uncomfortable with photography led me then to make the work in Afghanistan, which talked about the limitations of the narratives that came back from the conflict. And now that has led on to taking an image apart and putting it back together again, so that it can be more subjectively expressive, rather than just being a straight photograph.
So after Afghanistan, there was the Comoros project, the Comoros Islands.
The Comoros Islands, the islands of the moon, where the women are so astoundingly beautiful. It's ridiculous.
So explain the Comoros Islands concept and where that came from and what you did.
I was interested in migration and how the imagery of the immigration crisis in Europe was all alike, boats of people in the sea or orange life jackets strewn along the shorelines of islands of Greece. There was very little imagery that showed where the people had come from, the families of the people who have gone and who have been left behind. So what actually happened was I found out about the Comoros Islands, and kind of a slightly similar story to here. They were colonised by France. There was a referendum in the 1970s about whether they would remain under the power of their colonial ruler, or they would become independent. 3 islands voted for independence. 1 island voted to remain with France. So there's a small little island that's a Republic of France and a part of Europe out in the middle of the Indian Ocean. What's been happening is that
there's one island that's France, and then the surrounding islands are all
Comoros.
So they're all a separate country.
Yeah, and the president.
I bet you I know which one is the wealthier.
It's incredible, but out of everywhere I've ever been in Africa, this is like unspoiled Africa. Right. This is,
Yeah, so paint the picture. We've had the picture of Nairobi. We've had the picture of Kabul. Paint the picture of whatever place you arrived to.
Arrive on Comoros Islands. This is really funny because people say to me, "Were you not worried?" And I was like, "No, I wasn't worried." I got on a ferry. I was trying to get from the main island, Comoros Islands, to this other island, Anjouan. And we got on a ferry and we were told the ferry takes 45 minutes. 7 hours later, I could see dry land. I mean, everyone was like, "You're not worried?" But I kept on going. Before we got on the ferry, there was all these guys going to Madagascar, and I know that takes 18 hours on the ferry. And I kept on going, did we get on the wrong ferry? Did we on the way to Madagascar?
my image when you say that this is the opening scene of Jurassic Park, is it something like that when they're flying in over this island? Is it like that?
A little bit. There's a volcano on Comoros Grand, and then they're volcanic islands, and but I mean Anjouan is just unspoiled, beautiful.
So you were trying to microcosm the European, immigration problem in a smaller setting. So there's all these people from Anjouan trying to get into France, is it?
Yeah, and coming from the other islands and other parts of East and Middle Africa, Central Africa.
Are they not all going, why do we all vote for independence?
I don't know.
Right.
However, life on Anjouan, while there mightn't be, great enterprise and there mightn't be great opportunities, I mean, life is pretty nice there. And it's a beautiful island, and it's known as the Perfume Islands, and I mean, it really is the most abundant.
Beautiful beaches.
Beautiful kind of coastline. It basically just goes up in a big jungle-like hill, and there's one road that goes around the island, and you drive around it, and the spiral around it, and it's stunning. And the people are beautiful, and there's great fishing, and there's farming, agriculture. There's just not an awful lot to do.
How did the people receive you? Were you an anomaly as you
usually you'd go out to somebody, if you were kind of one of the only white people, there'd be a bit of attention. Nobody paid any attention to us. Right. And I think we saw one other white person while we were there. Right. Nobody paid any attention to us, and people could not have been nicer. They really could not have been nicer. And we went around and we interviewed some families of people who've lost members of their family crossing over. They leave in these little fiberglass boats at night. I think if you saw the size of the boats, and they cross this 70 kilometres of Indian Ocean. And I mean, even when we were on the ferry, some of the swell that kind of comes along and the size of the waves, but they go at night because the French military really police Mayotte, and so if they find your boat, they'll send you back. If you're caught getting off a boat and getting onto the island, they'll arrest you and put you into prison and then deport you. But many people have gone there and stayed for a very long time. However, the people in Mayotte don't really appreciate all the other Comorians coming from the other islands, but it is one of the only places in the world
do they still feel the kinship of,
they're all related?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
They're the same, unlike the idea that there's that Europe is predominantly a Christian place, and we're all white, and now all of a sudden there's an influx of Muslims and people that speak a different language. There, everybody's
this is like
same.
Irish people trying to bail up to Northern Ireland kind of thing.
Yeah.
What was the message that
However, there's no difference in religion. Everybody's a Muslim there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How different is that kind of Islam than the Islam that you've seen in Africa and Afghanistan? Or is it the same?
It was funny because the fixer in Afghanistan was going, one of the greatest myths about Afghanistan is that we're really religious. We're not. Yeah. And when I was with the three men every day, none of them prayed. However, there is cultural things like they don't touch women, which I didn't realise, and I was slapping cream on the back, being thanks a million, and then by the time they left, they were shook my hand, but they were, we were friends at that stage. I mean, when you go to somewhere like Comoros and you see Islam, you see it at its most beautiful.
Right, meaning?
It's respectful, people are respectful, there's nothing fanatical about it.
Yeah.
We went into a mosque, met a couple of imams, and were, greeted warmly, and they sat down, they answered any questions that we wanted to, brought us around the mosque, showed us, it's a real privilege to be inside a mosque as a non-Muslim.
Treatment of women?
Yeah, great. Yeah, well, you see, it's a matriarchal society.
Right.
When I went and Suela, the young girl in outside Mombasa, I really wanted to know what life was like for Muslims, and in a place where there was Sharia law. And I mentioned to you that I went to a wedding many of the women that I sat around and spoke with that night were second, third or fourth wives. And I asked them about did they have any problems with it, and they were like, they would prefer to be the only wife. However, everybody just tries to get along. But they have a graciousness about them when they speak about their religion and about what their religion means to them and about how it brings them together that I've never experienced within Catholicism. And I would come from a very Catholic family. And I would see how they would, you know, even through Ramadan, or just how they respect it.
Is that by choice or chance that the three major projects have been in Islamic countries, or is that just the way?
No, but I do have an interest in it.
Yeah.
You know, it is the other world from the world that we know or feel comfortable about. However, I would find it a lot less extreme, and I would find it a lot more empowering and a lot more beautiful than some of the Christian fundamentalists that are like being bred in the United States at the moment. I would find that a lot more frightening. Yeah.
Have you landed here?
Have I landed?
You know, you've gone on this journey, as you called it. Is this, and then you could spend the rest of your career doing this kind of dye transfer work that nobody else is doing in the world, or will you still say, I have to go to whatever the most violent thing that North Korea and photograph Kim Jong Un? Surely just give me an idea.
I don't think that's
these ideas just land in your lap.
I don't think I'm going to be going to North Korea.
Right.
I think it's safe. However, what I would like to do is move back to Ireland at some point.
You have a lovely cottage on the farm.
I have a lovely cottage on the farm, which I love, which is like my creative home. It really is. And when I'm there, I just have great ideas because I'm free from distraction of other things.
What would you say to the younger you who was desperate to get away from the farm?
I don't know, other than have faith in the cycle of life, because life has its own cycle, and if you just relax and trust, amazing things can happen. And that goes for every aspect of it, to finding the job that's right for you, to finding the partner that's right for you, to finding the road that's right for you. Just trust, relax and trust.
Jean Curran, that's a lovely way to end it. We always like to go out on a high message, but that was an extraordinary story, and I think if nothing else, for me anyway, it just shows how, being fearless as well is another thing that I would say about you that I think is amazing, and you're so focused on your vision. There's too many people around these days who keep telling artists, don't do it that way, do it that way, but I'm a great believer in what you do. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for
having me. There'll be lots of links to Jean's work. Obviously, those of you who've got loads of money should go and buy some of them, because artists like this get their next projects funded by the sale of their works. Jean Curran, the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Sean.